Close your eyes for a moment. In front of you, there's a map of Europe with edges darkened by candle smoke, paper strips pinned down with needles, marching lines drawn in blue ink, mountain passes marked in red. Leaning over the map is Napoleon, but the true center of this story is you, a general, a commander, an administrator, sometimes just a tired human being. If you were Napoleon's general, you'd understand within the first week that war isn't only the sound of cannon fire. War is the smoke from bread ovens, wheels sunk in mud, wet gunpowder, supply ledgers, endless coughing in hospital tents, the calluses on engineers' hands as they build bridges, and every single day the word tomorrow, rewritten from scratch. I'm going to take you down the stone staircases of the Alps, into the plains of Italy. You'll feel the wind off the Nile on your face, sit at a table with scholars in Cairo, and then, in the foggy fields of Central Europe, you'll watch how an empire is built and how it begins to crack. And in the end, in the silence of snow, you'll follow the footprints an army leaves behind as it retreats. This is not a heroic legend. It's closer to a documentary. City names, roads, supply depots, the scent of the seasons, the sound of people's voices, and right in the middle of it all, there's you, forced to decide. A brief note, this narrative is grounded in historical events, but the scenes have been reconstructed to place you inside them. Channel note, if you enjoy documentary-style history stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and please like the video. We truly need your support to keep bringing the next episodes. Now, let's spread the map on the table and begin. Chapter 1. The Gate of the Alps, the 1796 Italian campaign. It's late March, 1796. In Nice, the smell of sea salt mixes with a cold that never fully left winter. Your headquarters sits on the second floor of an old stone building. On the table lie engineers' sketches, quartermasters' lists, maps gathered from villages. Napoleon isn't emperor yet, but there's a rush in his eyes as if he has already been crowned. He turns to you and says, "We will finish Italy in a year." As a general, you don't think first of victory, you think of the road. Because an army that doesn't know the road will scatter, even if it wins. As you move into the Alpine foothills, many soldiers don't even have proper boots. Most coats are thin. Ammunition is limited. Your job isn't only to give the order to charge, it's to build ovens, find bridge materials, secure fodder for the horses. In passes like the Col de Tende, the wind can cut speech in half. Wagons slide. Cannon carriages must be hauled with rope and human muscle. And you learn very quickly that strategy sometimes means pulling a wheel out of mud. Piedmontese and Austrian forces want to trap you in narrow valleys, but Napoleon separates them with fast maneuvers around Montenotte. On the map, the routes look like fine lines. On the ground, they're full of stone walls, chestnut trees, tiny chapels. The villagers are wary. They don't speak French, but everyone understands the price of bread. In one village, an elderly woman offers you water, her hands trembling as she holds out the bowl. That tremble feels more real than any victory shout. Then the Po Valley opens in front of you. At Lodi, on the bridge over the Adda, the air smells of gunpowder for hours. In the soldiers' faces, you see fear and stubbornness at the same time. For a moment you ask yourself, if it were you, would you run? You would, because stepping back isn't just a step, it becomes an avalanche that crushes an army's morale. When the bridge is taken, the sound of triumph doesn't last long. Silence follows, the kind that comes with carrying the wounded. Field surgeons clean instruments with wine. Outside the tents, boots line up in rows and leave a weight in your chest. Entering Milan, the city feels like a theater set. Broad streets, stone arches, shop windows. But behind the back alleys are hunger, fear of disease, political whispers. As you meet local administrators, Napoleon's order is clear. The city will feed the army. Being a general here isn't only carrying a sword, it's taxation, requisitions, discipline. If a bread convoy is delayed, even the brightest plan collapses. The siege of Mantua drags on for months. Mosquitoes over the marshes arrive like a disaster with the summer heat. Sentinels shiver at night. Hospital ledgers swell. At Arcole, crossing marsh bridges, you don't feel the weight of your uniform. You feel the weight of decisions. Do we strike with that battalion now or pull them back? One wrong minute can cost hundreds of lives. At Rivoli, there's the bite of winter wind. You watch Austrian columns descend from mountain passes, tracing the ridge lines. If artillery is placed correctly, a single hill can rewrite fate. Even when victory comes, your mind stays on the reports. How many rounds remain? How many horses collapsed? Which bridges broke? Which villages can store supplies? When Mantua finally falls, joy is followed by an odd emptiness. The siege ends, but what's left behind are sick men, hurried graves, and bloated supply books. As you write surrender terms, you check whether damp air is making the ink run, because even small details prove how war is less glory than exhaustion and order. At night, under lamplight, drafts of diplomacy toward Campo Formio are discussed. Napoleon leans over the table and draws borders with his pen while you think about the towns that will be trapped on either side of that line. Verona's stone bridges, Brescia's depots, Vicenza's fields. When a signature lands on paper, whose taxes change? Which young man wears a different uniform? This is the quietest explosion of war. As fog spreads over the Venetian lagoons, you realize a city isn't only stone and water, it's alliances, fears, trade routes. And one morning, you look back toward the Alps, not with the eyes you arrived with, but with a heavier understanding. A general's duty is not only to win, but to keep the army from falling apart after winning. Because the hardest part of war is sometimes not the firing line, but what comes after the firing stops. When this campaign ends, something inside you doesn't. Every time you lean over a map afterward, you see the faces of the people walking beneath those lines. Chapter 2, Empire on Sand, Egypt and Syria, 1798. In May 1798, the stones of the quay at Toulon are hot. The sea has darkened under the shadows of hundreds of ships. Sails are tight. Holds are full. As a general, you learn for the first time that the enemy isn't only across the water. The sea itself is an enemy. Salt, wood, sickness, and the British fleet. Napoleon's plan is secret. Even the soldiers don't fully know where they're going. You stare at the blank space marked east and think, this will be different. A short stop at Malta, then Alexandria. As you approach, sunlight shatters across the water. Minarets on the coast appear like signal flares. The landing is not as clean as textbooks pretend. Waves throw the boats. Ammunition crates get soaked. Men stumble in the sand. The moment your boots hit shore, you issue your first orders. Wells must be found, depots established, discipline maintained, because in a hot climate, if discipline dissolves, the army loses before the battle even begins. The march toward Cairo is an endurance test. Sandstorms by day, cold by night. Lips crack, horses go wild at the sight of water. Then suddenly, near the Nile, green returns, palm trees, irrigation canals, villages. And then you see the glitter of Mamluk cavalry. The day later called the Battle of the Pyramids isn't fought right at their feet, but you see them on the horizon like a wall of history. As artillery smoke rises, you feel it. Fighting here is not like fighting in Europe. The ground is different, the language is different, even fear is different. When you enter Cairo, Napoleon brings another army with him: scholars, engineers, artists, surveyors. An institute is formed, measurements are taken, inscriptions copied. In the evening, you see temple sketches beside battle reports on the same table. For a general, it's a strange duality. Patrols in the morning, requisitions at noon, arguments about ancient stone at night. And you understand, this expedition aims not only at territory, but at narrative. The claim that we were here. Building governance in Cairo is its own kind of battle. Napoleon speaks of councils and meets local notables. You take the pulse of the streets. One day, you sense the hum rising, shops closing early, voices sharpening. When the revolt erupts in the autumn of 1798, anger moves through stone alleys faster than bullets. You mark doors and corners so patrols won't vanish in the maze. Engineers number streets. Units repeat routes until they can navigate even in the dark. And in the middle of it all, reports land on your desk about everything, from water distribution to bread prices. You even begin tracking the Nile flood level, because if the flood comes late, hunger grows, and if hunger grows, the army fractures. But reality pierces the narrative. News arrives from Abu Qir. The French fleet has been destroyed off the Nile. In a single moment, the idea of return is erased from paper. Whispers spread through the ranks like water. Fear. You change the language of your orders. Clearer, shorter, harder, because uncertainty can kill as surely as heat. In 1799, marching into Syria, the road is stone and thirst. El Arish, Gaza, Jaffa. Behind city gates, there isn't only an enemy, there's disease, exhaustion. In the hospital, tents. Doctors' voices grow quiet, and one word circulates: plague. As a general, you're trapped between morale and human terror. Some nights, you read lists of the dead more than you read the duty roster. Those lists are the real archive of war. At Acre, the walls prove stubborn. You can't count on support from the sea. You raise gun batteries out of sand and dig trenches, hammering the same stone line day after day, and each day the wall seems reborn. Even Napoleon's patience is tested. When the order to retreat comes, no one says the word defeat, but everyone understands. Retreat through desert is harder than attack, because when you walk backward, hope falls behind you. When you return to Egypt, the smell of the Nile no longer feels foreign, but you are no longer the same. One night, near Rosetta, you see a copy of a black stone covered in 3 scripts. The scholars are electrified. You sense that this stone will speak one day as loudly as any battle, because empires sometimes survive not by the sword, but by words. And then the whisper spreads: Napoleon is leaving for France. The heaviest moment for you is not the embarkation, it's the faces of the soldiers you leave behind. You give orders, but something else rises inside. If you were here, would you stay? That question hangs over the Nile like wind. Chapter 3. Foggy Plains, from Ulm to Austerlitz, 1805. In the summer of 1805, at the Boulogne camp on the Channel coast, wind never seems to stop. Tent ropes never slacken. Soldiers drill with the same routine each morning. Here, for the first time, you feel what the Grande Armée really is. Not just a large force, but a system. Bread ovens, hospital units, ammunition trains, cartographers. As a general, when you walk in front of a division, you're actually managing the logistics of a city. The original plan is England, but politics changes the map overnight. When news comes that Austria and Russia are moving, Napoleon opens his tent and announces the new direction in one sentence: East. That is when the second truth of war becomes clear. Sometimes, an army is redirected not by cannon fire, but by diplomatic telegram. The march begins, from northern France to the Rhine, then into southern Germany. On a map, it looks like a single line. In reality, it is daily mathematics. How many battalions marched how far, which bridges were crossed, how many horses died, how many men fell behind. Roadside inns are packed. Peasants hide their grain. You must keep the detachments disciplined, because if one village is looted, it won't feed you tomorrow. And the story spreads faster than your couriers. Crossing the Rhine feels symbolic, like stepping out of France and into the heart of Europe. In the Danube basin, fog settles over fields like a blanket in the morning. This is where Napoleon's favorite weapon appears: speed. The Austrian army under General Mack gathers around Ulm, hoping to link with the Russians and trap you. Napoleon turns you into part of a ring. Your corps flows along forest tracks, riverbanks, paths no one thinks of as main roads. The Ulm operation doesn't look like a classic siege. There are walls, but the true wall is the encirclement you create. When you watch through a telescope, you see smoke rising from the enemy camp. Proof they also bake bread, also search for water. That human detail makes decisions heavier, because an enemy can become a number in reports, but smoke reminds you there are lives inside the number. When Mack surrenders, cannons fire and flags come down. Yet you write in your notebook, a siege doesn't capture the enemy, it captures time. Vienna lies open. Moving along the bends of the Danube, bridges become critical. Pontoon troops go into the water. Timber is hammered down. Ropes are tightened. You place officers at every crossing, because a bridge isn't only a passage forward, it's the possibility of return. As Vienna approaches, the city's Baroque buildings can look untouched by war, but you know the truth. Cities are the greatest depots of war. A city's warehouses are an army's breath. On the morning of December 2nd, 1805, at Austerlitz, the air is cold. Near Brno, among hills and ponds, fog drifts low. Napoleon looks toward the Pratzen Heights with a strange calm. Your duty is simple and brutal. Your units must be in the right place at the right moment. Hours ahead, you've planned everything. What battalion emerges from which road, which artillery battery holds which rise, which unit pretends to withdraw to lure the enemy. On paper, it's clear. On the ground, it's fragile. When the battle begins, you hear the sounds coming through the fog, drums, shouting, cannon thunder. But your ear is especially tuned to one thing, the hoofbeats of messengers, because real time is measured by those hoofbeats. If one courier arrives late, a wing can collapse. You tuck the map inside your coat to keep it dry, because if snow falls, ink runs, and if ink runs, orders become uncertain. When the day ends, sunlight breaks through the fog and leaves a glow people will call the sun of Austerlitz. The victory is enormous, but the voice inside you says, this victory was born not only of courage, but of marches, bridges, bread, maps, and minutes. And as Napoleon's general, you now fully understand war as not a single moment, but a long organization. Chapter 4, Snow and Ashes, From Spain to Moscow. The final act, 1808 to 1815. Before the light of Austerlitz fully fades, another shadow grows. Spain. In 1808, crossing the Pyrenees, the air changes. Mediterranean salt gives way to dry dust. On the roads toward Madrid, you see olive groves, stone bridges, white villages. On the map, it's easy. On the ground, the war feels different. Here, the enemy doesn't stand like a neat line on a battlefield. You feel it at bridgeheads, in narrow passes, in patrols that vanish at night. The word guerrilla enters your reports, and you realize, in Spain, war is fought less in trenches than in shadows. Madrid has broad streets, but the tension is thick. The people's eyes are not like the wary eyes of Italy. These are harder, more personal. While you take roll call in a barracks yard, you hear church bells in the distance. Here, a bell is not only time, it can be a signal to gather. Your task is to keep your men alert against a threat that could appear anywhere, anytime. It's a fatigue of nerves that traditional warfare doesn't teach. In Spain, the hardest part is that victory refuses to become permanent. You take a town. A week later, your mail coach disappears on the same road. Resistance in places like Zaragoza turns stone houses into small fortresses. You discover that the point labeled city on a map is actually a street-by-street labyrinth. You hold bridges on the Salamanca Road, establish depots near Burgos. But every time you assign troops to guard those depots, your main army thins. The longer your supply line grows, the more war costs, not only in gold, but in manpower, time, and reputation. In Russia, the cost multiplies with the season. A march that starts in heat turns into autumn mud, then winter glass. You try not to like the word plunder, but when men are hungry, words lose their power. Typhus and dysentery advance as silently as bullets. The reports on your desk no longer describe only positions. They describe how full the hospital tents are, and again, the simple truth rises behind grand strategy. A starving army cannot rule anywhere. Between 1809 and 1811, the map swells. Berlin, Warsaw, Vienna again. But the true fracture comes in 1812. The day you cross the Niemen River, it's summer. The grass is green, the sky clear. Napoleon imagines a single, decisive blow. You look instead at the length of the supply line. Your depot chain stretches hundreds of kilometers. If a sack of flour, a crate of cartridges, even a horseshoe is delayed, the chain snaps. In Russia, distances can unmake the mind. Near Smolensk, the air smells burned, roads are empty, fields abandoned. You don't ask, where did the enemy go? As much as you ask, what will we eat? On the day of Borodino, cannon fire tears morning fog apart. Is it victory? Is it loss? It's hard to say, because even if you win, the army hollows out. You see it most clearly in officers' faces. The eyes are the same, but the inside has changed. When you enter Moscow, the final act you expected doesn't arrive. The city looks like a prize, but at night, the glow of fires grows. From a headquarters window, you watch distant districts burn and feel it. Taking a city is not taking a country, and winter is approaching. When the first snow falls, the most frightening thing is not cold, it's time shrinking. When the retreat begins, the language of war changes. Orders stop being advance and become survive. Frozen wheel ruts on the roadside, abandoned wagons, horses collapsing from thirst. As a general, the hardest decision isn't who you leave behind, but whom you can still save. At the Berezina, the river is a trial. The men building bridges shake. The water is knife cold. When you reach the far bank, you don't shout victory. You simply breathe. In 1813 near Leipzig, Europe stands against you like a unified wall. War is no longer only armies, it's nations. In 1814, as the road leads toward Paris, you smell your own homeland again, and the scent brings more sorrow than pride. When you see the fatigue in Napoleon's face at Fontainebleau, you understand the weight you carried was shared. Elba looks like an intermission, but in 1815 the 100 days begin. One last time, you try to ignite the old fire in your soldiers' eyes. In the fields of Belgium, rain makes the earth heavy. On the day of Waterloo, mud clings not only to boots, but to plans. When it ends, you fall quiet, because by then you know what you once called history is really the sum of thousands of small decisions. Now, you return to the map table. The candle is the same candle, but you are not the same person. If you were Napoleon's general, the strongest memory you'd keep would probably not be a moment of triumph, but the wind you heard on a march, the report you read in a tent, the cold you felt before dawn at a bridgehead. History is often built from quiet things like that. Closing, if this journey left a mark, if you felt the Alps under your feet, the Nile wind on your face, the fog closing at Ulm, and the cold breath of the Berezina, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. If you want this series to continue, your feedback and support matter most. See you in the next story.